You've been very lucky or unlucky today. I am the third former president of the Institute to speak to you. And then made me think, what is the collective noun for former presidents of the Institute of Acoustics? I just hope it isn't what somebody said in the paper the other day about former prime ministers and said, oh, it's an embarrassment of former prime ministers. So with a bit of luck, it's not that. Anyway, let's see if it moves on. It does, good. As it said in the programme, I'm going to talk about three things. So I'll carry on talking. One is a bit about my career. Another is about some projects I've worked on. If that will go. Okay, what's happening here? Yeah. Oh, there we go. Right. Yes, some about the project, and hopefully, or possibly, the most interesting bit is what I've called non-acoustic issues, things that have happened to me or I've had to encounter, which aren't to do with acoustics, but are to do with a career in acoustics. So, how does it all start off? Well, in my teens, I enjoyed playing cricket with lots of enthusiasm, but not a lot of ability, and I got to the Oval as often as I could. I had very uninspiring O-levels, but come A-level, I suddenly found I could do maths and physics. And so I got into my school. I went to a grammar school. I was lucky with that. And the school had a production line of trying to get people into Oxbridge. And so very appropriately following Robin, I got to King's College, Cambridge. But 3 years earlier than you started, Robin, so I've been the prize for the oldest one here. 1972, I went to King's. And that year, just to show how it was a different era, King's went co-educational along with two other colleges for the first time. They appointed their first female fellow, and bless her, she's still alive and she's still functioning. And King's always was a bit of a forward-looking college. And I went back for a reunion last year, and they've really got into gender neutrality. So the WCs had on one door cubicles, and on the other door urinals and cubicles. But because my generation was there, they thought this might be a bit too much for us. And halfway through the day, they turned the sign around to say, ladies and gents, so we didn't get totally confused. I finished a degree in engineering, so as following Robin like that. And I don't know whether it's the same today, Robin, but it was a very broad topic to start with. And as you went through it, you narrowed down. And I narrowed down into vibration. And I did actually a little bit of rather dodgy acoustics in my project, but I won't dwell on that. It's all very embarrassing. But come to the end of it, I had no idea what I was going to do. And so eventually I got a job with the former Greater London Council as an administrator. But I had about 2 years of that, and I thought, this isn't actually for me. I've got to find something else to do. And then as we've heard a bit today, I had that stroke of good fortune. An advert came round internally for somebody with qualifications and no experience to join the acoustics team in the scientific branch of the GLC. And that's what I did. And those days, public sector had buckets full of money. We bought every new bit of kit there was. We were full of B&K kit, the green ones. We bought the first meter that measured LEQ directly. Now, I'm trying to give you a feel for the age. I did my degree with a slide rule. I have a calculator story, which I will bore you with later over at the end of the day, if you're interested. But we had all this new kit, and it was a real lap of luxury. We also, they sponsored me to do an MSc, because I thought, well, I know I can get into this acoustics. And so I actually did an MSc at Chelsea College, University of London. And for some of you, Jeff Leventhal was my Director of Studies. And bless him, he's still functioning at the age of 95. He lives just down the road from me, still offering a bit of low frequency noise advice, which is absolutely lovely. And if you get the opportunity to study after you've started working in the area, boy, it makes it so much easier because you really understand what you're trying to learn about. And I actually found that when they came to the course about how to apply acoustics today and talked about some of the standards involved, I actually knew slightly more about it than the poor old lecturer who got lumbered into giving the talk. But the projects at the GLC were quite diverting. I did tend to spend a lot of time on toilet extract fans. You know, you really know how to live in this business. GLC had an awful lot of council housing, and if people complained about noise, then the acoustics team had to go out and try and sort it out. And toilet extract fans was a classic. You'd have to go in the evening when the background noise was lower. which meant going to rather dodgy housing estates, and you had to meet up with somebody from the mechanical and electrical engineering department who could switch things on and off for you. And they would sort of lurk out of the shadows. Oh, good to me. Oh, there you are. Right, okay, off we go. And I can remember one occasion when I went to this flat. Oh, it was dreadful. The noise from this fan, it was awful. And I happened to notice that the hatch in the roof, it was on the top floor. And I said to the engineer, I said, is that where the fan is up there? He said, yeah, do you want to have a look at it? I said, yeah, go on then. So he found a step ladder, health and safety, forget about it. So we moved the hatch, up we went the step ladder, there was this fan. And I said, look, is there any chance you could just loosen the fittings a bit? He said, yeah, I think so. I've got a screwdriver out, loosened it. So we shouted down to the lady, right, can you hear it? Yes, I can. We lifted it up. Can you hear it? No, it's wonderful, it's gone. Thank you very much. I now know what the problem is. An unisolated toilet extract fan on the roof. Other things we had to deal with were housing estates like this near to very busy roads. Now, the road that is there isn't as busy as the road over the back, but look at the barrier. What a fantastic barrier design. You can write down at least two things that are spectacularly wrong with it. But anyway, and it was so noisy, it was very, very hard to get a satisfactory internal environment. But it then struck me about 5-6 years into my career that I really ought to brace myself to give talks. And I was petrified. I thought, how am I going to stand up and talk to my peers about the subject? And in the end, I was starting to help organise meetings through the IOA. I'd got into it quite early on. And I thought, well, the only way to do it is to put myself down to give a paper. And so I forced myself into it. Now, that picture actually is 1984. Not too bad a hairstyle, I suppose. A little darker than my hair is now. And that was at the National Society for Clean Air conference in Brighton in 1984. They were just getting into noise, so I spoke about something. But what made that slightly interesting, I suppose is the best word, is that I stayed at the Grand Hotel, which 5 weeks later got blown up by the IRA. And it turned out that the bomb was in the bathroom in the hotel while I stayed there. We had to give all our names to the authorities. And one Sunday afternoon, I was in my front garden, and this car drew up, and these two big blokes came out in their dark suits and dark ties. And that's when I had my interview with Special Branch about what I'd seen at the Grand Hotel when I'd been there a few weeks before the bomb went off. We also had to deal with rock concert at Wembley Stadium. I mean, it's when the rock concerts really started to grow in the 80s. They'd been completely devastating in the 70s, no noise management whatsoever. And the consequence of that was I got to Live Aid. Now, most of you in this room will have to ask your grandparents about what Live Aid was about, but it really was quite something. And I spent most of my time at the mixer, which is that sort of tent-like thing in the middle. So that was quite a good experience to have as part of that. And the GLC was quite advanced. We did early telemetry stuff. We measured noise at Heathrow and then got the telephone line and got the level coming up of the lectures on the computer screen. And we had an early computer-based noise modelling as well. It was all good stuff. But Mrs. Thatcher abolished us in 1986. And so that meant I was thrown into consultancy. It led to a career in consultancy, which is roughly summarised like that. It looks as if I've been very dynamic, moving from different types of business and so on, a bit like Joe did. Nothing of the sort. I literally did not change job. All that happened above me. So I was working with an engineering consultancy for a bit, and then onto the other ones that you can see there. But what did happen, the first change, is that I was asked to run the noise team. There's about 10 or 12 of us. And suddenly I had to get used to a whole new suite of terminology. Work in progress, cost of sales, accruals, overheads, forward work planning, because it's all about the money in consultancy. It is about the money in consultancy, really. And so that was a bit of a career move that happened. I mean, I got paid more than my colleagues because I had the responsibility, but I had to learn about that as part of my development. And then when we got sold in 1992 to this multinational contractor minerals company, I suppose I can name names these days, that was Tarmac. They'd set up a consultancy with an American firm called Black & Veatch, because they thought rather than just being a contractor, we'll have a consultancy arm as well. And we found ourselves part of that. Well, that led to an interesting thing because we just won a job with, I think it was Redland, who are a minerals firm, doing all their noise work around their quarries. Redland found out we were part of Tarmac. Oh, you're not going to work for us. You belong to a competitor. Oh, okay then. We'll go along to Tarmac. And of course, say, look, we're here. We can do all your noise work. Oh no, you can't do that. You're not independent enough. So bang went all our quarrying work on the courtesy of this acquisition. But what did happen during that era is I suddenly found myself being asked to be responsible for teams of air quality people, teams of ecologists, teams of contaminated land. And so suddenly I became a sort of director of the environment. I was still a noise person, acoustician, but that was my role. So I then had to learn about how their businesses functioned, how they sold work, and it wasn't quite the same as noise, although it was pretty similar. So I ended up acquiring even more non-acoustic activity, but I did still have time to do projects. And it was in the mid-80s, early and late 80s, just as this transition to consulting was happening, I really got into giving expert evidence. Now, that's another big step in the consultancy career, is to be the expert at a public inquiry or in court cases. And this was one of the ones I was involved in. This is the Limehouse Link development in East London in 1988, 1989. It was a cut and cover tunnel. So actually the end state noise wasn't much of an issue, but noise during construction was absolutely huge. And one of the things that brought home to me is up until then, construction noise was always thought of being short-term, grit your teeth, you can put up with it. Not here, it went on for several years. And I can remember having to go to a public meeting. Again, that's where the speaking experience comes, speaking to the general public about how you're going to manage the noise. And it really isn't going to be too bad, you say, with your fingers crossed behind your back. But some chap said to me, he says, oh, very well, Stephen, you saying it's going to be over. I could be dead by the time this is finished. And he was. And it suddenly brought it home to me that we've got to be very careful how we manage construction noise. And HS2 is a good example now. There are places in Buckinghamshire that have got 6 or 7 years of chaos. May not be noisy, but they're going to be lorries with stuff around. And some people may not survive that. Now, I don't know what you do about it, but I think we have to be aware of the impact we have on individual people when we're building these big projects. The big expert evidence I did was in 1997, when I gave evidence at the Terminal 5 inquiry for Heathrow, building their 5th terminal. I acted for the local authorities. I ended up producing 11 volumes of evidence, would you believe? It was such a long inquiry, it had an annual dinner dance, which was not a frequent occurrence. And the other thing about it was, and you possibly could see from that picture, because I think that is actually at the inquiry, first time I've experienced, they had stenographers, they had people typing away in real time what you were saying. And so you would be in the witness box, and there'd be the cross-examining barrister over there, and the inspectors would be here. Nobody would be looking at you except the chap who was asking you the questions, because they'd all be looking at the screen and looking at how your words were coming up on the screen. And then at the end of the following morning, then you had to read the printout to make sure that the stenographers hadn't got it muddled up. It's a bit like the real-time subtitles you see on television programs, where occasionally you get some spectacularly odd words come up, but you had to watch out for that. So the expert evidence is important, and I think it said in the CV, I've been lucky enough, I've public inquiry, court case, Crown Court, and in front of the House of Commons Select Committee, actually for Crossrail, Joe mentioned it, that project earlier. And you are really put on your mettle. Do you know your subject well enough? Can you hold your own? And at what can be at times rather interesting cross-examination. But as Joe flagged, Institute of Acoustics, now that is my total IOA career. I can't emphasize too strongly how valuable it is to a professional acoustician to get involved in the Institute. I mean, Joe said a lot of things today, gives you contacts. And I was thinking, Joe, Trevor earlier, Tom, who was here, is gone now, Barry earlier on. I don't think I would have met any of you without the IOA, because our paths haven't crossed through day-to-day stuff, but it has through being part of the IOA. So it is very important. And I went through a slight agony when we got turned from GLC into consultancy. So, well, should I be spending my time doing this IOA stuff? And I realized in the end that you rarely, if ever, went to a meeting without either learning something that was valued to the company in terms of a new standard that had come out. Oops, I didn't realise that had come out. It's a bit embarrassing. Good job I went to this meeting. Or some gossip. One meeting I went to, or several meetings, I ended up recruiting somebody because I suddenly found they were a bit fed up with where they were working. I thought, come work for us then. A bit like Joe, you know, the old phone a friend. Didn't have to. Giving a lift from an airport would produce that still. You get all, and as well as the contacts that Joe's mentioned earlier, and possibly the biggest one, which I'll talk more about later on. I learned about a contract which I was going to ignore the tender document. It had come from the government, and we'd already lost 2 tenders. You know, the worst thing to happen with a consultancy is to be told you came second. Oh, good. Don't get the job. Come second. That's all right. No money in it. And we'd had 2 of those. I knew something had come in. I thought, oh, not another one of these. Can I be bothered? I was at a conference. I think actually it's the 25th anniversary conference at the Institute. And I was talking to somebody, and he said, oh, I've just got this blooming tender in from DEFRA, because what the job we used to be doing, but now they've got to go out to tender. And I thought to myself, I wonder if that's the one in my intro. And it was. And I thought, oh, I fancy this one. Went for it and got it, as you will see later on. I don't think we'd have bid for it had I not had that conversation at the conference with the chap. I'll teach him to talk about that sort of thing. Being involved with the Institute means you can get involved with writing documents. And I chair working parties that produce both of these documents. And that helps the old CV as well. Because if you're giving expert evidence, the barrister loves to be able to say to you, no, Mr. Turner, am I right in saying that you chaired the committee that produced these guidelines for environmental noise impact assessment? Yes, sir, I did. Immediately, that makes you look better than the other person, regardless, because you chaired it. And these things can sit on your CV. And I'm very flattering. The one on the left, 1995, it's still in use today. And I still get a little bit of credit. In fact, my name's at the top of the list because I chaired the working party. It's actually going to get updated quite soon. But all this is benefit. And I just give my time, or I've given my time to this sort of thing. But it really does help. One of the big things that happened in that era, when I was Director of Environment, is my managing director moved on. Whether he jumped or was pushed, it's difficult to tell. But anyway, me and 2 other people could have gone for the job of being MD. And I had a decision to make. And it really boiled down to this. Did I want to be measured, my merit to be measured, by how big the number was in the bottom right-hand corner of a spreadsheet, i.e. how much profit we made? Or did I want my merit to be measured by how good an acoustician consultant I am? And I chose the latter course, and I'm glad I did. But as your career goes on, you might find yourself in that position. Now, there are a lot of acousticians who are MDs of companies. But if you're going to be an MD of a huge 40, 50, 60 people business, you're going to struggle to do much technical work because you have to spend all your time looking after the business. So that was one decision I had. And as I said, I'm very glad I made that choice, because that contract I talked about was being a technical advisor to the government on noise matters. And that had probably the last almost 20 years now of my life. It has influenced what I've done and so on. So I ended up working with policy officials, as you'll hear later, advising government ministers. Got to Europe, represented the UK in Europe at regulatory committee meetings. Well, that in itself is a whole experience. And I'm going to bit observation about Brexit. I know we're not supposed to talk about it now, but there's a lot of talk about these blooming Europeans imposing laws on us. No, they didn't. They had to do it all in English. We had the pen. We knew what was going on. Everybody spoke English, much to the French's chagrin, because France was the dominant language until the Brits turned up. And you could influence what was going on because it was in your language. And there was certainly one bit, I can't remember what it was now, but it was something that wasn't quite right. And we put our hand up and they said, yes, United Kingdom. And I think I said something like, I don't think that phrase is quite right. Would it help if we just tweak the language a bit? Oh, thank you very much, United Kingdom. That would be great. So I did, and it was just what we wanted. Isn't that amazing? You know, so you have that. But what we had in that era was the Environmental Noise Directive, which was a bit of a game changer in terms of how noise was assessed. And then you had the regulations that went with it, and the guidance documents and action plans and so on, all produced from it. And I was involved in all of that. But we also had other things to deal with, the possibility of a national ambient noise strategy. We helped let research. Oh, look, there's one from Salford. Oh, that's well, actually, that's one that's still quite current, gets used a lot, misquoted a lot as well. And then Crossrail, that was a coincidence that Joe mentioned Crossrail. Well, I had a little bit of involvement in Crossrail, but nothing to do with engineering. It's all about the process of dealing with appeals if people didn't fancy the noise from the construction sites. As a result of that, I ended up getting more and more focused on noise. But one of the things that the Casella era had, and somebody talked about sales, and Robin talked about sales, they had a sales team, and they would get their money by selling jobs. So this chap would come up to me and say, Stephen, great news, I've got you a noise at work job. I said, great, what's the fee? He said, £800. I said, what? He'd get a bonus for selling this job at £800, which I couldn't do for that money. So I'd get grief because I was making a loss, while he was getting a bonus for selling a job that I couldn't do for the money. So we had to put a stop to that particular process because that just wasn't helping us at all. And then moved on to Bureau Veritas, which was the last one I worked for. They seemed to think that if there was any problem, they'd just invent another form for us to fill in and that would solve it. And they also were wedded to Lotus Notes. Do you remember? Oh, no, dreadful. The technical advisor role, I mentioned earlier about talking to government ministers. How do you tell a government minister what is the difference between 40 dB and 45 dB? That was the job I had. It was to do with air source heat pumps and micro wind turbines.